All right, so today we thought an interesting topic would be the possession of marijuana. The law has changed a lot in this area recently, and I think that there is a lot of confusion around this as to when is it legal to possess it, when is it legal to use it. So we're going to get into it. One question that we get is basically, when is it a crime to possess marijuana?
I get that question a lot just because Illinois transitioned from criminalizing it to decriminalizing it. But just because it's decriminalized does not mean you can just possess marijuana. If you are getting marijuana, make sure that it's from a dispensary. Usually at the dispensary, they give you a child-proof, smell odor-proof
Odor-proof.
container, and that's how it needs to be in your car at all times. It cannot get out of the container. Now, what the container is still up for argument, I guess, right? We really don't know what a container is, but I know what they give out at dispensaries is what we classify as, and I think that's what the lawmakers classify as the container.
Yeah, and it should also be, if you're driving with it, unaccessible to you as the driver.
Correct.
So childproof, odor-proof, and unaccessible to you as a driver. But what if you're just like going to the White Sox game or a concert or something and you have it in your pocket, Maurice? Is that okay to possess it in like a Ziploc
No,
baggie?
no, you cannot. Again, like you're in a public area, so again, you cannot use marijuana in a public area. It's still against the law. Just to caveat off what you said, like making sure it's not accessible for your driver, put it in the trunk. But public areas, you just can't willy-nilly have weed on you or use it. It's still against the law, and you will be likely arrested. You can only use it or possess it like in that same container, like in your private area. And if
In
so,
your
you
home.
can't even have kids in that area.
Correct.
Like they had being in a separate room, like where it can't get to them. It's like a whole bunch of caveats to it.
All right, so even though marijuana is technically legal, we're basically saying it's only legal if you buy it at the dispensary, right? You can't buy it off the black market. And
Yeah.
it matters how and where you possess it.
Right.
So if you're in your car, it has to be unaccessible to you as the
Mhm.
driver, and it has to be in an odor-proof and child-proof container.
What that means though, like again, there's a lot of gray area with that as well, because like when the legislators wrote this, the dispensaries, when they're selling the product, what's really like odor proof and what's child proof, nobody knows, right? Especially
Mhm.
kids nowadays, they have Miss Rachel and they can open up anything
Miss
and
Rachel.
everything, right? So again, like just err on the side of caution. Make sure that you have it in the container that you got. That seal is not broken and it is nowhere within your vicinity where you can access it, because cops will exploit some of these gray areas that are open for interpretation and make an arrest and charge you with this.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you having it in like a Ziploc baggie or like a
Yeah.
brown paper lunch bag, that's
Mhm.
not legal. I mean, a really good comparison to alcohol. Even
Mhm.
though alcohol is legal, you can't just like drink anywhere you want down the street.
Yeah.
You can't have an open container
Mhm.
in your
car,
vehicle.
This ain't New Orleans.
Yeah. Same thing like in public places. You
Mhm.
can't just be walking down the street and like smoking a joint out in public. You have to do it in private, like you said, not
Mhm.
around children and stuff like that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the penalties for possessing marijuana. Obviously, this would be a situation where you're not possessing it like legally in private in your
Mhm.
home, right? So an officer stops you and you have anywhere up to 10 grams. What would that be?
Anywhere up to 10 grams?
Yeah, like
Ordinance
10 or
violation,
less.
business offense, punishable by a fine.
What about misdemeanor? How much do you have to possess for it to be a misdemeanor?
10 to 30 is considered misdemeanor here in Illinois.
And then what if you have more than 30 grams?
Felonious amount.
Yeah, and then what are other things that police might look for to try and charge people like with something worse than just possession?
Depends on, what else they have. So, if you got some Snoop Dogg level, grade A marijuana in your car, you got a scale, you got individually, packaged baggies, whether they be full of weed or whether they're just empty, getting ready to package it up and move that dope. Or if you got cash on you, these are, A plus B plus C, plus D leads somebody to conclude E, that you are sitting out there, moving that weight.
Right. Yeah, and I think too sometimes what we see is a lot of marijuana with other drugs that they're
Mhm.
clearly
Oh, yeah.
selling,
Yeah.
so that doesn't help as well. One thing that has been really interesting, especially for us at Driver Defense Team, is whether or not the smell of marijuana
Oh, yeah.
alone is enough to search a vehicle. So obviously, before marijuana was decriminalized and then made legal in the state of Illinois, a smell was enough. I smelled marijuana, and then they searched the car and they didn't find a
Right.
crumb of marijuana anywhere, right? But now that it's legal, it's like you could smell burnt marijuana on somebody's clothes. That doesn't mean that they are illegally possessing it.
Right.
Or you could potentially smell fresh marijuana. But that doesn't mean that they're illegally possessing it necessarily. And another thing that came out too was like Uber drivers.
Mhm.
You know, what if somebody had just smoked and then picked them up and dropped them off, and then the officer pulled them over right afterwards and said they smelled marijuana?
Yeah.
So what have you guys kind of seen as far as that goes with any motions you've done or case law you've read?
I think it's right now it's an issue that's still to be decided in Illinois. You have some districts, in central and southern Illinois who don't obviously hold the viewpoints that, folks do up here in the north. And we truly have seen like the courts like really be divided about it, especially, they rest on the argument that it's still illegal federally. So when you're talking about your federal constitutional rights, is the odor of marijuana alone, does that give the officer probable cause for a search? As the federal law says, yes, they can still do that, and that's what officers rely upon. Whereas you have some, state courts say no, it's been decriminalized in Illinois, then they don't find probable cause. But I think it's an issue that still needs to be flushed out.
I agree. Yeah, there's like a district that unfortunately we don't practice in, and a case came down and said the odor's not enough. Alone, the odor alone is not enough. There needs to be more, and there's a totality of the circumstances test. But I don't believe that the issue has really been decided like in the districts where we practice, and I think it is ripe for an appeal. But it's important that you hire the right attorney if you're facing this charge, obviously, especially if it's a Class A misdemeanor or a felony. We always want to make sure that the officer searched the vehicle legally. And then on top of that, too, so many officers are not sending the marijuana to the lab.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of these prosecutors think that they can just have the officer testify like that it was a green leafy substance or do a field test, and that's not
Right.
enough, in my opinion, for them to meet their burden. So we win a lot of these either based on the search or based on the fact that the officer didn't send the marijuana to the lab. And I think another problem that our clients, their thought process is like, marijuana's legal. Who cares? I just got like a
Yeah.
possession of marijuana, and then they just plead to it, and it's like, no.
It's a
Yeah,
misdemeanor.
bro.
Yeah, it's a misdemeanor.
Just going off of what you said, I had a case where kids very young, 21, has marijuana, but everyone now thinks it's legalized. So obviously he had the smell of burned cannabis. Officer asked him if he can search, and he said, "Yeah, I actually have a baggie right here." And he pulls out the baggie and shows him the
Yeah.
baggie. So I think just that's also consent, and given the evidence. So I would never consent to a search. I think a lot of our clients get caught either by confessing or consenting to the search. Always say no to everything.
I totally agree. I see a lot of possession of marijuana cases by a driver where the driver consented to the search. They'll be like, the cop will be like, I smell marijuana. Do you have marijuana in here? And like you said, they're like, yep, here it is. And
Here's a
it's,
gram.
yeah, clearly illegally possessed, and then they get hit with the misdemeanor, and then you have to hire an attorney, and then it makes it way more difficult for us to defend you when you consented to the search. So don't do the police officer's job for them. Don't
Yeah.
consent to the search. Make them follow the proper procedures. If they can't, obviously, then that's great for you. Or if they do search, even though you didn't give them the consent and they didn't have the right, then we, as your defense attorneys, have something to go on. I think the most important thing is possess it legally. Think about it like alcohol. If you wouldn't like drive around with an open beer in your car, don't drive around with a baggie of marijuana. Just possess it legally. If you, do get one of these charges, call a competent, trustworthy attorney that's actually going to get the evidence, review it, and talk to you about your options. If you have a motion to suppress, make sure that they sent the cannabis to the lab, or if they could negotiate with the prosecutor for the best outcome. So I think the consensus is that these changes to the cannabis law are new, they are nuanced, and I think even the legislature and the judiciary is still trying to figure everything out. So it's important to keep up to date with the law, know your rights, and if you get charged with a marijuana case, call a trusted attorney.